Hello, and welcome to Change the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies. I'm very excited to be talking to lots of yoga teachers who will explain their passion for teaching yoga to students with different ages, physical fitness levels, wellness levels, and different goals. They will explain the benefits of yoga for these students and will be including teacher tips and pose modifications. I am Stephanie Cunningham of Yoga Lightness, and I've been teaching over 50s for 10 years. So this area is my passion and the passion of many other yoga teachers that you will be listening to in this series. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get started. This is episode 014, and we are talking to Katrina Kopec about her yoga classes for military veterans. This is Stephanie Cunningham, and I'm welcoming Katrina Kopec to our podcast today. And Katrina is offering yoga classes at the Boulder, Colorado in the United States, Veterans Center for veterans of all ages, as well as yoga classes and yoga therapy at other venues. Welcome, Katrina.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Why have you decided to teach veterans? What is the interest that you have there?
Well, there's a lot of military service members in my family. So my dad was an officer in the Coast Guard. My brother served as a flight medic in both OEF and OIF, and that's Iraq and Afghanistan, respectively. And both of my grandfathers served in World War II. And my mom's dad, actually, there were a lot of rough stories from World War II, and he had a lot of those rough stories in his history. And he had what we called at the time shell shock, which we now know as post-traumatic stress. So hearing his stories, seeing how it affected his family and trickled down through the generations was something that really interested me. And the veteran population, it's 1% of our U.S. population, and it's such an unrepresented or underrepresented group that I knew I really wanted to give back to this group in some way. And because my background is in yoga, it made most sense to do it in that kind of way.
What do you think that the veterans find appealing about yoga? And I'll just put in a little story here. I was in an area doing some training, and a gentleman that was providing the rides to and from my hotel to the training was a ex-paratrooper. And he didn't have very good knees because of that. Yeah. And he was basically living on cortisone for the pain.
Wow.
And I suggested yoga. To put it mildly, he was unenthused. Mm-hmm. So what do you believe the veterans that you teach, what is their what do they feel that the benefits might be from yoga, and why are they interested in doing it?
Yeah, so the way you originally phrased that question kind of made me giggle, because you're right. There aren't a whole lot of veterans who are saying, oh yeah, that yoga thing sounds really interesting. It's really, what I've found is if it comes from me or a yoga person or a lot of times just a female human being, if someone suggests to a veteran you should do yoga, it's oftentimes scoffed at and is not super appealing. And I'll get the responses like, well, yoga's for girls, or yoga is it's not a tough thing to do. I'm a tough guy. Like, I want to do things that represent that. And so my response to that kind of pushback is, well, yoga wasn't originally meant for women. It's happened that way in the West, but yoga was designed for men, and that turned some gears in their heads a little bit. And then hearing the story of how yoga sort of started on the battlefield, that's a whole different idea too, that it's not all peace and love and hippies and sitting around chanting necessarily. It can be a really profound experience for anyone. So I think there's one challenge or hurdle, I guess, to get veterans interested. And so that's what rephrasing a lot of the things that we do away from yoga, even if it's exactly the same thing, has been really helpful. Like what Richard Miller did with Yoga Nidra, and he kind of repackaged it into integrated restoration or iRest. And yoga is not in that word, and it's a very secular thing, and it's very accessible to the military in that way. And then once I get vets into a class, the impact is quite fast, which is really amazing to see. And so in the group I teach right now, I've been with them for 3 years, and we have some guys who have been there since day one, some guys who have joined in the last year or two, and some guys who are brand new. And we have the first 10 or 15 minutes of class, which I'll edit the language a little bit for your show here, where we call it BS time, where we just kind of sit down and talk about whatever's up. And it's really, in more yoga words, it's Sangha, it's community time. And then we go into the practices. We have some kind of breath, some kind of movement, usually a gratitude practice, and some kind of guided meditation. And some of the most profound things I've heard back from the vets. One was, it was one of my Vietnam guys, and he had been there for over a year, and he pulled me aside after class and said, like, it doesn't hurt to tie my shoes anymore. And that's a huge win. That's really, really big. That changes his day every single day. He can put his shoes on without pain. That's massive. I had another guy who said that he was a drinker. So when he would go out to the bars, he said, people aren't as scared of me anymore. And so I call that a win too. It's a very, very different looking kind of win. And one of the biggest things I see with combat veterans is some aspect of insomnia. So either having trouble getting to sleep or staying asleep. Nightmares are a really big one. And sleep apnea is also pretty big, where the breathing stops and starts throughout the night. And the practices that we do, whether that's movement, getting to know your body again, or just breathing, or listening to a guided meditation or yoga nidra, those guys who have trouble sleeping, that's the biggest feedback I get back, is that it's a little bit easier. It's a little bit easier every time.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think there's nothing worse. Well, extreme pain is, but insomnia is really difficult, and it really affects your whole body. So if you can sleep better, I think.
And chronic pain goes along with that too. A lot of these guys have chronic pain, and that affects their sleep as well.
Yeah. Well, that's great. But you talked about Vietnam veterans, and then it sounds like some of them might be younger. So sounds like you have an extremely diverse class. Is it mostly men, or?
Yeah, in my group, it's all men. There is a women's group as well at the Veterans Center. And it's still open. It's open to both men and women. But what we found is there's in both men and women, there's a really high rate of MST, military sexual trauma. And it's challenging in that atmosphere to provide an experience where women feel really comfortable in a group of men. And yeah, so even the way we set up the room is very specific to the kinds of traumas that we see most often, but it's a all male group at this point.
Okay. And a diverse range of ages?
Yep, absolutely. So we have, I think our youngest is probably early 30s. And our oldest, we have guys in their 70s. So yeah, all over the place.
Yeah, that must be very challenging to teach. I teach older people, so I know what the 70-year-olds can do, compared to a 30-year-old must be rather challenging for you.
Well, it is quite different. But also, so I know you know Boulder, Colorado. It's kind of a funny town here where most everyone is quite active and quite fit and healthy. And so even our guys who are in their 60s, 70s, they're still in pretty good shape. And, everyone has injuries and everyone has internal stuff that they're working with, but we go slow. And I tell them, as long as you're in this room and you're breathing, you're doing yoga. And I think that the more advanced yoga is really the more subtle yoga. So when they know that too, some of the guys who really want to move, who really want to get going, are okay with going slower, because that's the more advanced.
You're very good at presenting this. I'm very impressed with that.
Thanks.
You talked about your sangha, your community at the beginning. Mm-hmm. Why have you introduced that into your class as sounds like as a regular part of it?
Yeah, definitely. So with combat veterans in particular, and really anyone who's experienced trauma or has post-traumatic stress, there's a desire to isolate, to move away from other people, because it's hard. It's hard to be in community. And the isolation part of that really exacerbates all of the trauma, all of the post-traumatic stress. So just getting these guys in this group it's a win. It's a big deal that they're just there. And for them, and they don't know each other when they enter the group for the most part. Like in my group, they have to be receiving treatment from the center in order to be in the group. So, most of them haven't met before. And when they hop in this group of this thing that maybe they thought was girly, or maybe they thought was like not a thing a combat vet would do, and they see all these other guys from all walks of life really enjoying this and really benefiting from it, that's huge. And they have, their community time. It's I kind of jokingly call it BS time, but it's really it ranges so vastly week to week. And I just kind of let them guide the way for that. And I don't really interact a whole bunch, but sometimes it's like the filthiest jokes you've ever heard coming out of these guys. And sometimes it's war stories, and sometimes it's dark thoughts that are hard to work with. And sometimes it's somebody went to an acupuncturist and is telling everybody about it, and it can change minds just to hear it from another combat vet. That's important for them to connect on that level.
Well, if they're only 1% of the population, then they probably do have trouble connecting with people of like experience. So this must be, I can see where that would be really, really important. I think you were very smart to add that to your class.
Yeah, well, and it wasn't intentional, I don't think. It just kind of happened. But
the best things are not intentional, aren't they?
Right, exactly. And it's you just reminded me too that there are places that veterans can go and have that community time, but most of them very much revolve around alcohol. So for these guys who have identified that, whether they do or don't drink, but for a lot of them who have identified that's not something I always want to do, or something that I want to always relate to my veteran community, it's nice to have another thing they can do and be around that community and not feel like they have to drink.
Yeah. Great. Another thing you said in another interview was that you don't get off your mat and you don't go and touch them or do adjustments. Is that because of the trauma issues that most of them probably have?
Correct. Yeah. So yeah, when we set up the space, I always put my mat right by the door. And this is something I learned in a trauma training a long time ago. It's the vet mindset. The military mindset is to have your eyes on all the entrances, exits, so you know what's going on. So if I'm by the door and someone opens the door, they're already looking in that direction. So it feels safer. And everyone's back is always to the wall. So no one's ever behind you. If we do a down dog or something, like no one's looking at your butt, like everyone has their own space. And yeah, I don't leave my mat in those classes, and I do the practice with them while I guide them through it. and I don't do any physical adjustments. And I've explained to them now, since I've been with them for a few years, that that's not what a lot of public classes are like. So some of them are ready to step out and go to yoga studios or to go to the gym and take a yoga class, and it's different. And so I tell them, like, if you're going to do that and you don't want to be touched, tell the teacher right away. And if they touch you, it's okay. Like, they're just there to help you. So know that if it does happen, it's okay.
Yes, I've heard that about people with trauma, that the touch can be quite disturbing, shall we say. You gave me a few examples of what the vets have said to you about how yoga has affected them positively. Mm-hmm. What would you say is the overall benefit? Obviously, if you're still at this center for 3 years, the center itself has decided that it's very beneficial. What is the center's thoughts on this, shall we say?
They have been wonderful. So when I started there, I was fresh out of this trauma training, and the training was for, this is going to be a roundabout way to answer this, just heads up. The training was for specific to residential programs and people who might be resistant to yoga. So I showed up at the Boulder Vet Center and was ready to just like push my way through there. And so I showed up, I think, kind of aggressively, and they welcomed me. They're like, great, we've never had a yoga program. We'd love to do that. So it was a unexpected, very warm welcome from them. And they had already had a meditation group, which the vets themselves had started, I think, at least a year before I got there. And they met every week, which was wonderful. And yeah, since I've been there, the director of the vet center has turned over, and the new director has been incredibly wonderful in supporting the vets. And she's in our classes almost every single week, and really is very supportive of bringing yoga to these guys, which is extremely helpful.
Good. I could see where it could be different from that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And you said that they had to be in treatment the vets had to be in treatment at the center for them to access the yoga classes. Does that mean
Correct.
that part of their treatment might be saying, I think you should be in the yoga class? Or is it more of, this is a resource to you, and you can access it if you like?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is, because it's not a residential program, it's completely optional. So I know a lot of the therapists do recommend that they try meditation, that they try yoga, that they try these other resources at the center, but it's, at the end of the day, totally their decision if they go or not. So that's where we've had really the most success of getting new people in the group, is from other vets recommending it to them.
Oh, okay. All right. That's great. Like I said, my experience with the paratrooper made me wonder how that was going to work.
Totally.
So, you said you have some that have been there since day one.
Mm-hmm.
Have they, and also that you've been trying to tailor it, shall we say, to what the vets want. And so you've been actually asking them what they want. And what kinds of response are you getting from that?
So I think I'm going to rephrase that just a little bit. So when we go into a class, I'll ask them if there's anything they're working on, or if anything specifically is hurting, physically, mentally, emotionally. And I'll get a lot of like shoulders and hips and knees, and like there's a paratrooper in our group, and just a lot of people who jumped out of helicopters and planes and things, and it hurts your body over time. So I'll allow the session to be guided by those sorts of requests. But really there's still a structure in place. So it's community time, and then we do some kind of breathing just to get into our bodies, and then some kind of movement. And the movement is very at this point, I guess, intuitive. So I used to follow a curriculum, and after a while, it didn't really fit anymore. And it made a bigger difference just to be present with the guys. And the movement itself, it's part of yoga, but it's not all of yoga. So just connecting to body, we do some of like the brain science, I guess we'll call it, like where we do opposite arms and legs to kind of connect the hemispheres. And we'll do some core strengthening just because everybody needs that, especially as we age and our posture starts to change. But it's really what I think of as the core, the meat of these kinds of practices are the connection, whether that's them to them or me to them and back. Realizing that we're still connected to these bodies, whether we feel them well or not, breathing and relaxing. And relaxing is so massive and something that even if you're not a combat veteran, even if you don't have a thing that's traumatic in your life, we still forget how to relax. So to teach people that is important. And you can't just say relax and people relax. You have to guide into that kind of experience. And and I think I'm realizing I'm totally just talking about whatever I want to talk about, and I forget what your question was, but but I think it's so important as a facilitator for this kind of group to really be able to kind of roll with whatever's in the room, and to refer out. So that's why we always 100% of the time have a therapist in the room. If something gets too big for what I can handle, then they can step out with the therapist as well, which is really helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be, to have that backup, I think would be very helpful.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. If stuff comes up, if we move our bodies, if we start to connect back into our hearts, to our minds, there's stuff that's going to come up. So yeah, some of it's gentle and we can talk or breathe through it. And some of it's a little bit more forceful that needs some bigger help than that.
Yes. On your blog, you said something absolutely incredible, I thought, which is, and I'm going to read it. It was a teacher of yours explained our relation to emotions, and you were just talking about, how moving the body and everything can really lead to some very strong emotions. But you said the way that we relate to our emotions is like a giant circle. We have big ups and we have big downs. Our practice of yoga doesn't clear these emotions, but it reels them in so that our circle gets smaller and smaller until we can both easily observe our ups and downs in a way that we're sitting with and observing emotion, but not so deep in them that it is impossible to see past. And I thought that was a beautiful way to explain how yoga might be able to help people whose emotions can become quite large, shall we say.
Yeah.
Is that what you see in your classes? I mean, these in your case, these men have been through probably a trauma that most of us can't even imagine, quite frankly. And,
yeah, definitely.
To know that yoga could help them with that, I think, is such a powerful thought.
Yeah, and you're right. It's most of these guys that I work with, that just combat veterans as a community, a lot of them have experienced things that we as civilians cannot imagine. And I think it's definitely worth saying that again. So if anyone listening is interested in working with combat veterans, there's no like, oh, I know what you're going through. I know how you feel, because you don't. You have no idea. And there's no possible way to understand what they're going through. And we can use these tools of yoga because we know they work. And we can show up with compassion and with empathy and sit with them while they're going through these things. And it is, I really do I love that you found that blog. I really do love that way of thinking about the yoga practice. And it's something I still use for my own practice and to share with other people. And it's, yeah, we'll get feedback sometimes from some of the vets who are students in this class and say, like, one guy in Yoga Nidra had a memory that he had totally shut down from, it was either OEF or OAF, I don't remember. And it was the last time he remembered it, there was a very violent reaction to it. And the time he remembered it in a Yoga Nidra practice, which is this, if anyone listening again doesn't know what that is, it's a guided relaxation practice lying down usually. And he remembered it again and had a really changed relationship to it. It was still there, still painful, but there was no violent reaction that needed to result from it. It was just, yeah, that's a thing. And there's another idea that, and this is not something I would say directly in a veterans class, but this is kind of the idea we're working around, is that we're all really part of something bigger. So in yoga world, in yoga language, we have the 8-limbed path, which is called Ashtanga, and the 8th limb is Samadhi. And Samadhi is really this idea of interconnectedness with everything. So every person, every animal, every creepy crawly critter, every plant, every piece of dirt, everything is connected. And what yoga as a whole does is helps us come to this experience. And really, Yoga Nidra has the most, from my experience, the most direct route to this kind of sensation of everything being interconnected. So for these guys to experience even a flash of that, even a glimpse of that, to see that they're not alone, even though they feel isolated, even though they feel by themselves, like, surely I'm the only person who's experiencing this, to take a step back from it, realize we're part of something a whole lot bigger and connected to everything else, it lessens that load a little bit. It makes it feel lighter, I guess.
Yeah. I think that really sums up the beauty and benefit of yoga, of making us connected.
Mm-hmm.
And anything that happens that makes us disconnected, with enough yoga, I don't know if that's time, it doesn't really matter, just enough yoga, we can feel connected again. And thank you for bringing that up. That's really a beautiful thought. And I'm sure our listeners would also be quite happy with that, with that thought, that that's what yoga is about, is our connection to everything.
Yeah.
So, Katrina, we've had a lovely talk. Is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't gotten to, that you would like to tell the listeners?
I would just, anyone who is considering working with anyone in trauma, post-traumatic stress, and veterans especially, do it. It's still a very underrepresented population in our country and in our world, I'm sure. I know mostly about the U.S. veterans, but I think a lot of people get intimidated by specialties, I guess, especially in teaching yoga, of like, well, like the prenatal thing feels like there's a lot of people doing that already, or it seems like there's a lot of people doing these different niche groups. But with veterans, it's unfortunate that we still don't have enough people doing enough to serve. So there isn't any competition, which is kind of nice, but it's also, we need more people. So if there's any thought, if there's any desire that you want to work with this population, if there's a hesitation, reach out. There might be some blocks along the way. There might be some struggles and hurdles to get over to physically get yourself in the VA or the vet center or at a VFW post or whatever, but do it. We need you.
Okay. Thank you. If you would like to explore this a little more, Katrina can be reached at her Facebook page. It's called Unbound Therapeutic Yoga. She also has a website, which is www.unboundyogatherapy, which is all one word, .com. Or her email is katrina@unboundyogatherapy.com. I really want to thank you, Katrina. This has been really a very satisfying, shall we say, podcast. In the first place, I've learned a lot, but secondly, I'm very impressed with the depth of giving that you've shown in giving your yoga skills to this group, and their acceptance and being able to benefit from it. So I want to thank you for being on the podcast, but I also want to thank you for your service.
Thank you. And thank you for organizing this and hosting these conversations. I think they're so important.
Thank you for that wonderful interview. If you would like to be a guest on Changing the Face of Yoga, please go to my website, www.yogalightness.com.au, and under the Changing the Face of Yoga tab, you can complete Be Our Guest form. After reviewing the form and finding it applicable to this podcast, we will send you a link to schedule an interview. Please download, review, and tell your friends of any podcasts that are of interest to you and to them. If you would like to contact me, send an email to info@yogalightness.com.au. And thank you for listening to Changing the Face of Yoga.